And hello, Amanda.
Hello.
So we are just waiting for a few more people to sign on. Looks like we've got about 12 people in so far, probably a few more people huddled around computers. I might as well move this to the official opening slide. It is noon, so we'll get started right on time, and hopefully a few more people will sign in as we keep going. So might as well get going. Welcome to the BCMA webinar number 5. This one is Cold Calling and Sweet Talking, Building Grassroots Community Partnerships, and it's presented by Amanda Sittrop, who you're going to meet in a second and who you can already see on your screen there. The BCMA webinar series is produced in collaboration with the Royal BC Museum, so a big thanks to them as well. My name is Ben Fast, and I am, there's a picture of me in case you don't know who I am or can't see me on the screen. I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator for the BC Museums Association, and I am signing in from our office here in Victoria. We were focusing on a little bit of office branding behind me right there, which has already fallen down once, so we'll see whether or not it falls down and whether or not my head's in the way. But anyways, today we are going to be talking about cold calling and building community partnerships. So if you have any technical questions as we're going through, just send me a message in the chat function or even an email if you need to. My email is up here on the screen right there. So today we're going to be talking about cold calling, and I thought it would be good to bring in an expert, a true expert in the field. And so I decided to call Tom Selleck and bring Tom Selleck in, because as you can see, Tom Selleck is good at calling people. Now, not only does he have the best mustache in the show business, but as you can see, he's so good at calling people that he can even call people from the beach using a landline without even having a line attached to it. So that's basically the key message of this whole webinar is be like Tom Selleck and call people without even needing a line. Yep, Tom Selleck, it's true. That's probably Matthew calling in from Sunshine Coast Museum. It's true. Tom Selleck is a great example of that. But actually, we're not here to talk about Tom Selleck. We're here to talk about cold calling and building grassroots community partnerships with Amanda. And so before we get started, just a quick thing. If you do want to be like the Sunshine Coast Museum and Archives and you want to use the chat function, it's that little button right there on your black bar. Since you've all signed in with the same program, Zoom here, you just use that chat function, and if you want to send us a message, make sure that you see this all panelists and attendees option next to the 2, because that way everybody will be able to see it. And I think Amanda's going to have a couple things later on where we want to hear everybody's answers. So we'll read out the questions and read out the answers as well. But if you want to try that right now, maybe try the chat function and tell us where you're signing in from. It'd be great to see where you're all coming from. So if everybody can find it, it's on your black bar up top or maybe on the side. Courtney's signing in from Victoria. Hi, Courtney. I think Courtney holds the record for signing into the most BCMA webinars so far. This is number 5 for her. Some Soyuz and Pemberton. I think Kara's been in from a lot of them. UBCO in Kelowna, Vernon. So getting some people from the interior. Vancouver, Pender Island. That's great. We got a Gulf Island with us. Delta, Smithers. Welcome, Smithers. And even one from Ottawa. Great to see some people from outside the province coming in as well. So it seems like a lot of people have found the chat function. That's great. So let's keep moving on then. So this month's presenter, you can already see her on the screen. It's Amanda Sittrop, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Amanda. I never actually asked how you say your last name.
That is absolutely perfect.
That is perfect. That's great. Now, Amanda is joining us from Burnaby, and as we talked about just before we open this up to the public, she's been calling from every single place in Burnaby, it seems. She works in a lot of different roles all throughout the city of Burnaby, Burnaby Village Museum, for one, and also works at the Vancouver Maritime Museum as well. As well as doing some other things with the city. Like she called me from a fire department yesterday, the fire hall. So pretty cool to see her coming in from all different offices. And she's actually joining us using her phone's hotspot today. So thanks, Amanda, for going through all the hoops that you need to do to use this platform. So I'm going to throw it over to Amanda, and she's going to get going. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat function, like I said, and we'll read it out. Good to see that we've got a few more people signed in. So why don't you take it away, Amanda?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben. And thanks to the BC Museum Association and to the Royal BC Museum for having me. And I'm just going to switch to my screen. and get this PowerPoint going so you guys can have a look. So cold calling and sweet talking. So that was the topic that if some of you were at the Lower Mainland Museum Educators Conference in January, I did an Ignite session about it. And it was a shorter presentation, and I'm hoping today that we're able to talk about some of my experiences a little bit and try and incorporate yours as well, because for me, I came up with this topic and I wanted it to be something that was discussed within the community, because as a green new employee back in 2010 at the Canmore Museum and Geoscience Center, I was unfamiliar. Whoop, going ahead. Let's go back. There we go. At the Canmore Museum and Geoscience Center, I was hired on for one position, and with a lot of these smaller museums, you end up becoming a Jack or Jill of all trades. So you end up taking on extra responsibilities that you didn't necessarily think would be a part of the position initially. So trying to grow and trying to learn in that position, and where do you start? So for me, I started as a digitization project manager, but within a few short months, I was also the interim curator. And I was responsible for researching a project that featured 50 artifacts from the collection that had little or no provenance. And in the case of Canmore, it was a very small town and about 9,000 permanent population. And for somebody like me who came from a city environment, moving to a small town, it was a very different feeling, and I wasn't quite sure where to begin. So I thought the best way to get some of this information about these 50 artifacts was to actually reach out to the community itself. And so the project was funded by the Calgary Foundation, and with that funding, we were able to do a couple of things to reach out to the community. So on the left-hand side here, you can see one of our advertisements that we ran in the local newspaper, and we kind of did them in these crime scene investigation, CSI kind of files that the Vancouver Police Museum, if you're there, you might appreciate, hopefully. And yeah, so we gave a little bit of a brief description about the artifacts, because we didn't want it to all be about what we knew. We wanted the community to bring their information to us. And so we put these ads in the newspaper because that was the community that we were reaching out to, that they were primarily learning about what was happening and engaging with what was happening in the community through the newspaper. But we didn't want to just cut it off there. We wanted to make sure to include all members of the community in all different age brackets and the way that they engage with content. And so we made sure to put those advertisements in our Facebook page as well. And we also made sure to have sort of gathering places and to acknowledge the history and the experience of a substantial community of miners who had retired and were still living there, and were very proud of their history and took a lot of ownership of it. And so in order to honor that and to include that, we had a miners meet and greet, and it was hosted by us in the atrium of the Civic Center, which is where the museum is located in Canmore. And we had coffee, and we had some snacks that was away from the artifacts, of course, that we then included as kind of a catalyst to conversation, so to get everybody talking. And we just had a tape recorder out on the table and let the conversation happen organically, because we didn't want to force anything. And there were some really great conversations and some connections that were made. And for the members of the community that weren't able to come and attend the miners meet and greet, we actually did some outreach as well. So we took some of these objects to the local community center. We took them to the seniors residence, the primary seniors residence, and did some reminiscence programming with them. And we also even took it to the palliative care center. And the exchange and the experience was not just rewarding for them, because we had some feedback from them telling us how much they enjoyed it, but also for us to know that we were engaging with the community in a way that they felt was valuable. And the one memory of that whole project that really stood out to me, and that I hold really dear to my heart till this day, was one of the retired miners. His name was Jimmy Fitzgerald. And Jimmy called me up one day and he said, "Amanda, do you like onions?" And I couldn't help but laugh because it was a very random question. And I said, well, yeah, Jimmy, I do like onions. And he said, well, you know, I've got a whole bunch in my garden. Why don't you come over and grab some? And it was that experience and that interaction that showed me that the strained relationship that the museum had with the community before I had gotten there. Obviously, we'd come to a new place, and it was that sense of connection and value that really fueled my passion about community engagement and made me want to incorporate as much as I could in my future work environments. So when I moved back to BC, the first position that I had was at the White Rock Museum and Archives, and I saw Kate say hello. Hello, Kate. And Kate's the current curator there at the White Rock Museum, so she may have heard some of this stuff already. And but the first exhibit that I was responsible for installing was Chinese Legacies Building the Canadian Pacific Railway. And that particular exhibit was a traveling exhibit, and it was standalone. It had all of the items included, was exhibit cases. You can kind of see those on the bottom left-hand corner below the dragon, the text panels, which were freestanding there, and also this diorama display, which is life-size, and a board member and I put that tent up together, and we figured that all out on our own. And we were a little challenged with that, but we used the Google and we figured it out. And behind there was the diorama, which is actually 4 panels of 8 feet by 4 feet plywood. So this took up quite a bit of space within the museum, but the challenge that I faced was that the museum had recently acquired these beautiful glass display cases that were specially designed for the museum. So what were we going to do with them? Because there really wasn't any storage space. We couldn't move them out of the way. So I decided to kind of look into the community, and for someone who had only visited White Rock maybe 1 or 2 times before starting there, I wasn't quite sure what kind of community White Rock was and who I could find to work together with this. So as I mentioned earlier, the Google is a very important part of a lot of the exhibits that I've planned. And by searching through, I was able to locate the White Rock Chinese Art Center. And working together with them, they provided us some artifacts to go on the display cases, some specially made artworks by both youth and adults, as well as some cultural artifacts to include in the exhibit. And this wasn't only a benefit to both of us as partnering together, but it was really exciting for me to hear that the White Rock Chinese Art Center would later, after coming and attending the exhibit opening and meeting members from the city of White Rock, were able to then develop and create special events with the city in the future. So it kind of opened up opportunities, not just for us, but for them as well. And so the first kind of grassroots exhibit and community exhibit that we had to build from scratch was a celebration of the history of the museum. So pictured here is the White Rock Railway Station, which is the museum itself. And I'm not sure how many of you have been to White Rock or been to the museum, but it pretty much looks like that today, except the coloring is a little bit different. And so it was this history that needed to be reflected in the exhibit. It needed to be about the community. And through preliminary research, I was able to identify that the station itself was what helped build the community. It was kind of a central focal point. And so I thought it was really important that we include the community, because just like in Canmore, members of the White Rock community are very passionate and love their community and take great ownership over it. And so I thought that was a really important part to in developing the exhibit. And the first main important community member was the first ever curator and executive director, Lorraine Ellenwood. And she had written a history about the museum, and she had offered on many occasions to assist with either editing, doing research, and she was a fantastic resource for future exhibits as well. So taking advantage of the people that are there who are willing to help you. And she was able to offer guidance and contacts, people that would be really important and effective in creating an exhibit that mattered and was relevant and engaging. And the one aspect that I really wanted to come across was not just that it was a history from books and pictures that are kind of stock photos. I wanted there to be a sense of personalness, of intimacy. So there was the community connections corner, and we were very lucky to have a good relationship with the local newspaper. And so a reporter came down and he talked about the exhibit in his article, and actually helped us by putting a call out telling the community that we wanted to have their stories and what were their memories of the station. And so we had quite a number of individuals share their stories. And so in the top left-hand corner, there's a watercolor painting there, and it was brought in by a woman who, it's kind of hard to see in this image, but she was being proposed to in front of the station, and somebody had painted that memory for her. And at the time, it was a really good memory, but when she donated it, she was no longer with him. They had divorced, so she happily donated it to the museum, but thought it was a really good memory for us to share. There was also another woman who was really excited to tell us about how the first time she'd ever seen the ocean was when she was 6 years old, and she was traveling up from Idaho in the 1950s. And she remembers sitting in the railway station and watching the waves come in and like crash because it was this stormy winter day. And it's stories like that that are a little bit more personal, that I knew that visitors of all kinds, whether they were tourists or locals, would feel that sense of connection. And I thought it was also really important in the center there, you can see the cork board. So it's not just memories that were contributed during the development of the exhibit, but they continued to be shared. And that board was emptied out on a weekly basis because there were constantly people sharing memories. And it was a really fantastic thing for us to have and to include. And the next exhibit that we had was called Rock, Paper, Scissors, the Transformative Power of Craft. And every year, the City of White Rock has a Fiber Arts Festival, and the organization that puts that together really encourages different locations within the city to feature a display, whether it's a small one or a large one, that includes fiber. And fiber isn't necessarily just, cloth. They were really wanting us to think outside of the box. It could have been paper, it could have been clothing, it could have been felt. And so it was that kind of idea, thinking outside the box and being approached by a few different organizations. So initially we had this relationship with the Fiber Arts Festival, and then we were approached in the fall of 2013 by Simiamu Arts, which is the local arts organization, who had been approached by the Craft Council of BC. And in 2013, it was the 40th anniversary of the Craft Council, and they were encouraging Simiamu Arts to have an exhibit, but because Simiamu Arts' facility wasn't large enough to have the kind of exhibit they wanted, they approached us. And so it was this fourfold partnership that came together and was absolutely fantastic. We featured 15 different artists, 3 of whom you can see here. In the top left, we have Suzanne Girard, who is a vellum artist. You have Roxanne Charles in the bottom left, an Indigenous artist from Simiamu First Nation, and Sam Knopp on the right-hand side, a ceramic artist. So these are 3 of 6 artists who contributed their time free of charge to do these demonstrations of their artworks. And it was just another way for us to try and engage the community in a multitude of different ways. And so this idea of demonstrations or lectures was carried forward into future exhibits, like Science is Art, Botanical Illustrations of Canadian Tree Fruit Varieties, which was a traveling exhibit that we borrowed from the Kelowna Museum. So if you're there, Kelowna Museum, thank you. And so we organized a number of different lectures, and a couple of them you can see there. Leanne Bueller from the Honeybee Center in Surrey, and Bob Davison from Davison Orchard. So Vernon and Kelowna, you're probably familiar with that gentleman. And again, that partnership. So we located local organizations to help us fill these beautiful glass display cases. And in that display case there, we have items from Darts Hill Community Garden, which I didn't even know existed until we started trying to research and supplement the traveling exhibit that we had borrowed. And as you can see here, there's Bob from Davison Orchards, and it was the attendance in these kind of exhibits that, or forgive me, events that we had that really showed the direction that we should be taking. So really knowing your audience and knowing what they would be interested in is what's going to help those events be successful. And so it was Bob himself. He was an engaging person that brought in such a large audience to attend his event. And another way that we try to include the community, and you can kind of see it in the back distance there, is the art wall. And it was another method, another way of including a different demographic within the city. So rather than just limiting to certain age groups, then we were including elementary schools and high schools. And it was coordinated with teachers, and they would sign up as much as a year in advance and find out what our current exhibit was. And then the students would create artworks to relate with that exhibit. And it was a really successful, and still is a very successful program that is primarily volunteer run. So it's really great to have these varieties of community members that are feeling engaged and feeling connected, and seeing value in the museum itself. And that sense of engagement and variety was something that we tried to incorporate into I Do, the Wedding Stories of White Rock. So this was that thinking outside the box again. This was the same time period as the Fiber Arts Festival in the following year. And following in that idea of knowing your audience. So we had this discussion at work about how people love to watch Say Yes to the Dress. It's just one of those things that everybody can appreciate or enjoy, or maybe I'm saying everybody too generally. Maybe there are specific women that are very fond of that show, but that sense of love is universal. And the exhibit featured 12 couples who shared not only their stories of how they met their partners, but what makes their marriage successful, and a wide variety, from people who have been married for 2 years to people who had been married for 40 years. And so the variety you can see here. So in the front was one couple, and the bride had actually sewn her own wedding dress, and she didn't necessarily want a dress. She had this blue velvet suit that she wanted to wear. And then the second bride with the white dress with the black detailing, her and her husband wore custom-made Converse runners. And the far left outfit, you might be surprised that actually was a bride's outfit for her wedding. So she is a professional clown. And during the stress of the wedding, she had decided to elope with her partner, but that they still had this wedding they had to go through with. And so they decided to get dressed up in their clown outfits instead. So these interesting stories that kind of draw you in and make you want to be a part of it, or feel that connection. And that sense of connection, we tried to go outward as well, not just in terms of the exhibit and coming and visiting the exhibit, but having special events that coordinated with it. So on the bottom left-hand side was an example of us utilizing a different demographic within the community. So White Rock is very lucky to have the Youth Ambassadors program, and those young women are responsible for assisting nonprofits in the community. And so these girls, very happily, some of them got to wear these brides' dresses, which were a part of a fundraising activity that we had outside of the museum. And then there was an additional fundraising activity that we had at the museum itself that we coordinated with the exhibit opening. So the couples that had kindly given us their stories and loaned their clothing to us were being honored, and at the same time we were able to generate funds for the museum and recognize community organizations such as wine merchants and chocolatiers. So kind of opening up that network just a little bit more than you would normally. And the last exhibit that I'll be talking about is one that I felt was probably the most successful. And the reason that it was because it was brought to the museum by a community member. So Glenys Thilm is from the BC History of Nursing Society, and she approached the museum one day and said, you know, the Peace Arch Hospital is having their 100th anniversary, and I think you guys should do an exhibit. And she was quite adamant about it, and she was familiar with our collection because she had come and done research before and had said, you know, you should really do this, and was quite firm about it. And so we approached our board and asked if it was an idea that they would want to follow through with, and they said yes. And it was Glenys's passion and her assistance in both researching and promoting the exhibit that made it such a success. And the ways in which it was a success were kind of threefold. So there was her assistance, and on the left-hand side is one of our art walls. And this particular art wall was a little bit more three-dimensional. So students were required to research a historic medicine, and as part of their research, they had an artistic component. So they needed to recreate the bottles of medicine, and those were going to be featured in the exhibit. We also made sure to include kind of the lecture or demonstration portion that we found successful in other events. And on the right-hand side there's Ellen Kennett, who is a member of the Ladies Hospital Auxiliary, one of the founding members. And it was her role in the community and that sense of ownership that I was mentioning before by community members that made it a successful presentation. As you can see, it was very well attended because the community responds to the people that they know and things that they're familiar with. And the most successful event, I should say, for coordinating with this exhibit was a historic fashion show that we had. So Glenys is there on the left-hand side in the teal jacket, and she had prepared a PowerPoint presentation to coordinate with this collection of uniforms that another member of the BC History of Nursing Society, Sheila Zer, forgive me, that she had a collection of over 50 uniforms that she had either recreated herself, resewn herself, or had accumulated different pieces that would give you a resemblance, or had found them and collected them over the years. And this event was truly successful for many reasons. So Glenys was an advocate for it and promoted it throughout the BC History of Nursing Society itself. And in doing so, different hospital auxiliaries within the Lower Mainland, such as the Royal Columbian Hospital, promoted it within their newsletter and their network of people, which just broadened it up even more. And the sense of passion and happiness and joyfulness was also seen within the volunteers that we had as models. So on the left-hand side is a museum volunteer, Norma Langton, who happily donned a World War I nurse's uniform for us. And I think she even managed to rope one of her grandchildren to be a model as well. And then on the right-hand side is a volunteer from the BC History of Nursing Society who was more than willing to wear her own uniform from the 1950s. And I think we were all flabbergasted at the fact that it still fit her. Very, very impressive. But the thing that I noticed, and I'm kind of going into the question period here, and I'm gonna make note of this, is that as I came towards the end of my time at the museum, I noticed that there was one community group who was lacking in a lot of the exhibits that we did, and that was the Simiamu First Nation. So before I left, I kind of put the idea out there that our next exhibit should really include a partnership with them. And I was so happy and thrilled to attend the opening of sea to soil that Kate had put together, and was so proud to see members of the Simiamu First Nation at that exhibit opening, and that Kate continues to facilitate a relationship and keep that relationship going with them. And so perhaps that's where I'll kind of ease off a little bit and maybe have a little bit more of a discussion here. And I know the platform, this webinar platform, might make it a little bit challenging, but I see that people are very good typers and they're very quick. So I would love, because what I found as the success in my exhibits that I helped coordinate was that it was an involvement, it was a community, it was a number of people that worked together. So I feel like all of these people, all the community that we have here today in this webinar, that we can all learn something from each other, that I'm not just here to tell you my experiences, but we're here to work together and make the best exhibits that we can that are engaging for our communities. So is there anybody who wants to maybe take on the first question or take on the second? We don't necessarily have to go in order. These were just questions that I had presented that I think are thought-provoking and are something that we should really try and think about when we're creating our exhibits.
And so if anybody wants to use the chat function, you can do that. Or if anybody has like a really, really, really good story, there is a way that we can turn on your microphone and hear from you. So just write in the chat if you do have something, and we can try to make that work. And make sure again that you put your chat to the all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see it, even though we're going to read it out. And it might take a little while for somebody to type it up.
Yeah.
I had a question for you really quick, just as people are
Sure.
approaching that, Amanda. Did you find that most of the projects you're talking about were ones where the community came to you, or where you had to do the work and go to the community to create them?
The final exhibit that I featured, the critical care exhibit, was brought to me, but the other ones had either come up in like casual conversations with fellow staff members, or the I Do exhibit was actually inspired by an exhibit that I was involved with at the Canmore Museum, and I had seen just how many people showed up to that exhibit opening. So for a small community of 9,000 permanent residents to have the atrium of the Civic Center just filled with people showed me that that particular content was obviously something that people were interested in. So that's why I thought that would be a good topic to pursue. And then the board of directors were game. So that's how that one kind of started. So yeah, it's kind of organic, and sometimes it's purposeful. It really depends on the time of year also. So for us in White Rock, the challenge was always that the winter was a very slow season. So how are we going to get people into the museum? What can we do? And so it's those partnerships that were an attempt to try and do that, to try and open up to a bigger network to get more people to visit the museum.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the winter downtime for sure.
Yes.
Okay, anybody tackling one of these questions? Let's see if we can get that chat feature working.
Mm-hmm. Don't be shy, please don't be shy.
And since I have the names of everybody here, I could call somebody out. We don't want to do that. We don't want to volunteer people.
I saw the list too, so I know a name or two I can call out, but I'm hoping to hold off a little.
Let's save it for a couple minutes.
Well, the third point, like I can say, how does your organization maintain relationships? That's one part that kind of I think relates to my title in the sweet talking area. So I'm big on going for coffee. Like it's a simple thing. If you can take like an hour out of your day, and I know we have very busy schedules, like every museum is doing more with less. It's kind of like the theme of the world right now, but it's those small gestures that can help maintain relationships or even build relationships. So for instance, the Lower Mainland Museum educators were having a meeting in September, and the presenter that I'm coordinating with, I said, do you want to meet for coffee? And she was absolutely game for that, because it's a new way of connecting, especially when, you know, a lot of our lives are on a computer. It's a nice way to kind of solidify the person that you meet via email in person, to add that connection and to reinforce that relationship building.
I think we're going to need to call a name out pretty soon here, Amanda.
Okay. Did I see something? No?
No. Oh, there's one. So
Okay.
This one comes in, I'll just read this out here. This one comes in from Greg Thiessen, Greg, where are you joining us from? Are you joining us from, CBC? Yeah, Abbotsford. Great. So you talked a lot about grassroots connections to spread word and advertise. How much have you utilized paying for ads? That's a question from Greg.
At the White Rock Museum, it was definitely a do more for less situation. So there was no budget, and a lot of that online advertising was done via Facebook. And this was before they had new logarithms, so you could definitely get more bang for your buck by doing a post. And then as soon as the new logarithms came in and they wanted your money, we had actually a board member who would kindly donate some funds so that we could promote an ad. So we would spend $5 and promote an ad and get a little bit more out there. Yeah, sorry, I'm reading Joelle's.
Yeah, actually, just before we do Joelle's, I don't know if this was Matthew or somebody else at Sunshine Coast Museum and Archives, but they wrote, agreed, I think reconnecting every once in a while over coffee is a great way to maintain connections and get inspired for future collaborations. So I think that's a very common way that people get together. That was actually submitted through the Q&A function. So make sure you use the chat function if you're going to be sending in messages there. So Joelle's question was, how do you work with organizations or groups where they only have volunteers and you have paid staff, i.e. expectations of who does what, or they cannot charge fees, but you do charge, for example, libraries or maybe other community groups?
I think it's a matter of having a conversation. So at the end of this session, Ben has a one-pager that features comments that were made by attendees of this Ignite session that I did at the Lower Mainland Museum Educators Conference. And it was establishing expectations, because communication is key in any relationship that you have. And I believe that's especially important when you're developing partnerships, is that to set out what each other's expectations are and what each other's abilities are, because it's hard to say, like for instance, the White Rock Museum has a predominantly higher aged amount of volunteers. So the expectations of them might be different than younger volunteers who maybe have more experience with computers or that kind of thing. So that having that conversation and establishing those expectations, I think is a good way to start.
And would you say that sort of relates to your second question on the slide there, that would be one of the big challenges of creating those new partnerships? Absolutely, because
if you don't set out those expectations, or you don't discuss them at least, then each party might be at a disadvantage. So you might expect that your partner is going to take care of something, but if you didn't have that conversation with them, then how are they supposed to know what their responsibilities are? So it just helps with the assume factor. You never want to assume anything. So having consistent follow-up, and it can be hard because your schedules are really busy, but it's important to take that time to make sure to follow up.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have a question coming in from Smithers, speaking of libraries. So was there any liability paperwork around people modeling historical garb, such as when the young women wore the wedding dresses, or possibly even I would assume, sorry, I'm assuming here, but some of those historical dresses as well, from the First World War, or the nursing exhibit? And did the dress owners sign an understanding giving permission and absolving the museum of responsibility for damage?
So the wedding dress fashion show, the dresses were loaned by a historian in Abbotsford, and so those dresses weren't loaned by members of the community. It was a collection that historian had, and so I think she agreed to the fashion show with the understanding that she knew that damage might happen to her dresses. And so she was, I think, a lot less concerned about that. In terms of any damage to the dresses that were a part of the exhibit, we absolutely had paperwork that it would, but we would take every effort that we could, and they understood that there might be some damage, and if it were at our, the terminology, it was a little bit more of like legal jargon, but we definitely had some documentation to protect us with the dresses that were on exhibit.
And would those be any different than sort of your standard exhibit or loan paperwork that you would do, or was it something special for those type of exhibits?
I think it was our standard paperwork at the time because it was the legal jargon version. And
Right.
so, and then when we did have the fundraiser, which involved red wine and white wine, I was very adamant that that the utmost amount of care and protection was going to need to be had in regards to those dresses. So the wine was to be enjoyed in another area of the museum. And then we had volunteers stationed beside each dress to make sure if anybody did manage to get in with a glass of wine, that they could gently encourage them to enjoy viewing the dress from a distance.
Right. Right. We have a bit of a longer one from Kelly, who's writing in from Port Coquitlam, saying that her museum has historically been quite insular and is not specifically invested in building relationships outside of smaller communities or demographics that the board already feels comfortable with. So this person, Kelly, is looking to diversify the membership and build networks with other cities, communities, and museums. Any suggestions on where to start to diversify an audience in that way and reach more demographics within the community or across multiple communities?
Kelly, this is a great way to start. Participating in something like this webinar, attending conferences, attending workshops, any opportunities where you get to meet other members of, like, the museum field is a very small field. And so if you're able to get to know other people in the same positions as you, or even like for me, if I attend an event that has nothing to do with the museum, but I might thoroughly enjoy it. So for instance, I attended the Burnaby Blues and Roots Festival a couple of weeks ago. At an event like that, I might go up to vendors that I see and approach them and have a conversation with them and say, oh, well, I work at this organization. So to constantly be thinking about connections that you can make and relationships that you can build. And if the people in your organization aren't supportive of it, then I'm not saying to be insubordinate and go behind their back or anything like that, but to definitely take a proactive approach. So, and it sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. And in that case, I think that if you are establishing a relationship with someone and they're willing to help you out with no cost to your organization, I think that's a good way to kind of slowly work in those new relationships. You're welcome.
Any other questions coming in, or anybody want to tackle one of these that are on the slides here from your own perspective? It always takes a while for people to type. Oh, here's one. This one didn't go out to everybody, but from Sunshine Coast, we are curious what your most unorthodox or unique community collaboration has been to date, and how did it go?
A very good question.
And maybe how did you make it happen too?
Yeah. See, now I need to think. I feel like we should put the Jeopardy music on so that I can think about that one. Unorthodox. You know, being in Canmore, it was, I was the only employee at the museum that had any official training or certification in museum work. So I kind of felt like I could not really do whatever I want, but that I could approach things from a different perspective. So I think that my personality itself, like I'm an outgoing individual, so that's kind of just who I am, part and parcel of who I am. So I proposed that we do this reminiscence programming with seniors in the community, and by doing so, and I did the research to find out, what are the best ways to tackle that, and it was very positive and it was very well received. And I think it's like what I was saying earlier, like just going for it and doing what you need to do. And if it fails, then it fails, and that's a learning experience. And like for instance, the rock, paper, scissors exhibit at the White Rock Museum, there were 15 artists. And for those of you who've worked with artists, they are a unique bunch of humans, and they can have a different sense of timing. It can be a little bit more fluid for them. And there were a couple of artists that weren't happy with the way that things turned out. And so it's a matter of being okay with that, acknowledging that, and taking note of it so you can move forward and learn from it for your next experience. So yeah, I think with that particular exhibit, I wanted to make sure to have enough lead time for following exhibits, so you can accommodate any issues that may arise.
And what is maybe an unorthodox or a unique one that you would like to see happen, or whether it's your museum or any museum? What do you want to see happen?
Well, I think that the Museum of Vancouver, it does some really great things. So I interned there in the summer of 2010, before I started my position in Canmore, and they kind of push the boundaries with what a museum is supposed to have. So at that point in time, the curator of contemporary issues, which I think is a fantastic title, asked me, she said, "Amanda, do you think that if I did an exhibit about sex, that would be a good idea?" And I said, "I think that would be a fantastic idea." And so a number of years later, they had Sex in the City, or Sex Talk in the City, forgive me. And it was a really great exhibit, and it was educational. Like, it wasn't the way that you would expect, like, if you've been to those kinds of museums in Europe or that kind of thing. So I think, like, taking concepts and ideas that are a little bit outside of the box, but finding a way to make it like relevant and engaging is fun, and I think that anybody should tackle it. So those kinds of, like, I loved the Tattoos and Scrimshaw exhibit at the Maritime Museum a number of years ago before I started working there. Like, I think that those kinds of contemporary ideas, like if somebody did an exhibit about man buns, I think that a lot of people would attend that and have a good time. So.
Definitely work in Vancouver for sure.
Absolutely, yes.
Kelly chimed back in again, saying that years before she worked at Poco Heritage, they did an unmentionables exhibit about underwear and undergarments. Quite scandalous. So
wonderful.
Those are great examples.
Those are very good examples.
And John McKenzie, who's from Pender, he just wrote in saying, just for general information, there is an online museum database site that allows the formation of groups, such as Small Museums Western North America, and that there's a eHive website to check out. It's based in New Zealand, but that might be worth some people taking a look if you're interested in finding similar museums or other ones you could partner with there. And then Allison is at the BC Sports Hall of Fame. She wrote in saying during their 50th anniversary, they participated in 50 community outreach events. That's pretty ambitious and pretty amazing. They would piggyback on events and festivals set up already, and they basically invite themselves, she says, mostly seen as a value to the festival or event, etc. Yeah. Being a provincial organization, their community is really large. Depending on the community, they take artifacts from that region or Hall of Fame members from that community. Great results and longer-term relationships have been established since then. So thanks, Allison, for that one. great example of tailoring it to your community as well. And I'm sure you've probably experienced that, Amanda. You need to know who you're talking to and how to present that.
Yeah, and having those, like even just attending a community event that has nothing to do with your museum, go and talk to people at that event, and like at a library event, and see what they would be interested in, like network in that, so that you can try and piggyback on things in the future, as Allison said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're running into the last 10 minutes here. We'll leave a couple more minutes for any other questions. Did you have anything else on your end while those questions are coming in?
I can go to my last slide, which is for comedic effect. Hang on, one moment. Oh, nope, come back. Come back. One moment, please. It was one of those ways to engage community members and new audiences. So I decided to make a meme while I was at the White Rock Museum. They installed this new statue along the waterfront, and it was just a optimum photo. And considering that memes were very popular at the time, and they still are, I just wanted to say thank you all.
That almost looks like Tom Selleck, ironically.
A little bit, like we've come full circle.
Yes. Yeah, well, if there's any other questions, feel free to type them in quickly. I will say that Allison has, or not Allison, sorry, Amanda has given everybody a one-page sheet of sort of tips and resources, and I'll be sending that out afterwards. We have a survey, sort of an exit survey after our webinars that I'll send out with that as well. So if you could fill that out, that would be great. That helps us know what you want to hear in the future and how everything went, and you'll also get that resource page as well. And Amanda, would it be okay if I included your email in that in case anybody has any other questions?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So I'll include that in there as well. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'm just going to quickly shoot back over onto mine, and I'll make a quick note that our next webinar is happening pretty soon. It's happening on the 19th of September. It's going to be about marketing, so marketing for museums, and it's presented by Erica Stenson here at the Royal BC Museum. So if you've been to our conferences in the past, you may have heard her talk about marketing in some of the Ask the Expert sessions. This will be a little bit different. She's going to hopefully tailor it to some of the museums that sign up. So if you do want to sign up early, that might just help hear some examples from you guys. You have the link on there, and we're going to be sending that around in that email, the follow-up email as well. So September 19th, we're back to the third Tuesday of every month. You may have noticed that this one is actually the 5th Tuesday of August, but because of my holiday schedules, and I think Amanda was away as well or busy with work, we bumped it back a little bit. So thanks, everybody. And we hope that you all had a great summer. Looking forward to getting back into the fall. I don't see any other questions, so why don't we, since Amanda's running off of her phone's data, why don't we say thank you very much, Amanda, and hopefully we'll see you all in September. And thanks, Kelly, for saying thank you.
Thanks to all of you for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.